The street was full of people. Cars rushed past. Shopkeepers called out to sell their goods, and the city felt alive with sound. In the middle of this busy square sat a man who did not seem to belong. He wore clothes that were torn and faded. His shoes were old and broken, and his hair looked messy as if he had no place to wash or comb it. He sat quietly on the ground with a small sign made from cardboard. The words were written in shaky handwriting. "We'll play for food." He held an old violin case beside him, though it looked empty and forgotten. People walked by without paying him much attention. Some glanced at him with pity, others turned their eyes away as if ashamed to even look. For many, he was just another homeless stranger among the hundreds in the city. Someone invisible, someone forgotten. But for the man sitting there, each second was heavy with hunger and loneliness. He had not eaten properly for days, and he had no family to turn to still. He carried himself with quiet dignity. He did not beg loudly, he did not shout or chase after people. He only waited, holding his little sign and hoping someone might give him a chance. Then came a rich man walking through the square. He wore a fine suit, polished shoes that shone in the sunlight, and a watch that looked more expensive than most people's cars. He was confident, arrogant, and enjoyed being noticed. When he saw the homeless stranger with his violin case, a cruel smile appeared on his face. He slowed his walk and stood in front of him, blocking the light. The homeless man looked up carefully, not expecting kindness but still waiting to see what would happen. The rich man laughed loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Play for food? Is that what your sign says?" he asked. His voice was sharp, mocking, designed to cut deep. "What? Can you even play? You probably don't know a single note," he added. His words were cruel, but his laughter made them even heavier. It echoed across the square, and soon people began to notice. A few passers-by stopped, curious to see what was going on. They looked at the homeless man, then at the rich one waiting for some drama. Some smiled nervously, some chuckled, others just wanted to see what kind of scene would unfold. The rich man enjoyed the attention. He spoke louder now. "Imagine this, everyone, a man who looks like he hasn't had a bath in months claiming he can play music. Shall we believe him? Or shall we watch him make a fool of himself?" His eyes sparkled with cruelty and he lifted his chin proudly. The homeless stranger did not reply immediately. He lowered his gaze, his lips pressed together tightly. He had been mocked many times before, and each word felt like a stone thrown at his heart. But unlike others, he did not shout back or argue. He stayed calm, his silence strange to the crowd. Some expected him to curse, others expected him to leave. But he simply sat there, waiting. His quiet dignity made a few in the crowd uneasy. They had come expecting a joke, but the man's calm presence gave them a strange feeling. The rich man, not satisfied, bent down closer. His perfume filled the air, sharp and strong. He tapped the violin case with his shoe and said, "Why don't you prove it, old man? Show us what you can do. Or maybe you're just another liar with an empty case." His words were bitter, meant to wound, and the crowd laughed again. Children pointed. Teenagers pulled out their phones, ready to record. They wanted to capture the failure of a poor man, to laugh later, to share it online. But the homeless man finally lifted his head. His eyes were tired, yet there was a strange light in them, a memory of something long forgotten. His voice was soft but clear as he spoke. "I used to play once, long ago." That was all he said. No excuses, no begging, just the truth in a few quiet words. The rich man smirked, shaking his head. "Used to? That's not good enough," he replied, and then he did something unexpected. He tossed the violin case toward him as if it was nothing. The sound of the case hitting the ground made a few people gasp. The man looked down at it, his hands trembling, slightly, not from fear but from hunger and weariness. The crowd grew larger now, more people gathering to see what would happen. Some whispered that this would be funny, others hoped the man might surprise them. No one really believed he could do anything, not in his condition. The air was heavy with expectation. Like the pause before a storm, the homeless man placed his hands gently on the violin case, his fingers brushing against the old, cracked surface. The rich man crossed his arms, a cruel smile still on his lips. "Go on then. Show us. Prove to." Everyone hear that you're worth even a single meal, he said. The stranger did not answer. He only opened the case slowly, as if it carried his entire past inside. The laughter of the crowd faded into whispers. The city's noise seemed to dim for a moment, and the square held its breath. The stage was set and everyone waited, expecting humiliation, but none of them could guess what was about to come next. The man sat on the ground with the violin case resting in front of him. The laughter of the crowd still echoed in his ears, but he did not let it show on his face. His body was thin, his hands rough and worn from years of hardship. He could feel the eyes of every person fixed on him, waiting for him to fail. He lowered his gaze for a moment, breathing slowly. It had been years since he had last touched a violin, and the weight of time pressed heavily on his shoulders. The rich man stood tall above him, his voice loud and cruel. He wanted to see the homeless stranger broken and humiliated. He folded his arms and tilted his head with a smirk. "Well, are you going to play or are you going to keep staring at the ground?" he asked. The crowd chuckled, some shaking their heads. Some people whispered that this would be over soon, that the poor man would only embarrass himself and leave. But the stranger stayed calm. His silence carried a strange power. He did not shout back. He did not defend himself. He whispered softly, almost as if speaking only to himself. "I used to play once, long ago." His words were not meant to impress anyone. They were not excuses. They were simple, true, and filled with something no one in the crowd expected. Dignity. Some of the people close enough to hear stopped laughing. The way he said those words touched something inside them. His voice had a tired honesty, a weight of pain, as if every syllable carried a memory. A woman in the crowd frowned, trying to place that feeling. A boy lowered his phone for a second, uncertain if he still wanted to laugh. The rich man, however, was not moved. He sneered and shook his head. "Once? That means nothing. If you really could play, you wouldn't be sitting here now begging for food." His words cut like knives, sharp and bitter. But still the homeless man did not rise in anger. He only lifted his hand to touch the case. His fingers brushed over the worn leather, and his heart beat faster. He could feel not just the violin inside, but also the memories locked within it. It had been so long since he had played. Back then he had stood on stages with bright lights and velvet curtains. He had worn clean clothes, and people had clapped for him. That life had ended suddenly after tragedy struck, but those memories still lived inside his soul. Now, sitting on a dirty street corner, he wondered if his hands would even remember the strings. Still, his hunger and his need for dignity gave him courage. The crowd leaned closer as he slowly unlatched the case. The sound of the metal clicking open made people fall silent for a moment. A hush spread. Everyone expected nothing more than a broken instrument and a broken man. The stranger's hands trembled, not from fear of the crowd, but from years of carrying invisible weight. The rich man tapped his polished shoe impatiently. "Hurry up, old man. Show us what you've got. Prove your sign is not just a lie," he said loudly. His voice carried over the square, pulling more people closer. Soon the circle grew larger. Businessmen on their way to work stopped to watch. Children pulled their parents toward the scene, and tourists began to record the moment. The homeless man lifted the violin out of its case. His fingers touched the wood gently, as though greeting an old friend he thought he had lost forever. The violin was scratched and worn, its color faded, but to him it was still beautiful. He remembered every stage, every piece of music, every tear it had once carried in its notes. He closed his eyes for a moment, holding it against his chin, trying to steady himself. Some people in the crowd expected him to drop it. Others whispered that he would play out of tune and make a fool of himself. But there was something in his movements, slow, respectful, almost sacred, that made a few hearts tighten with curiosity. It was as though they were watching a man awaken from a long sleep. The rich man could not stand the suspense. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Do you really think anyone will believe you were ever a musician? Look at you. You're nothing but a beggar now," he said. The words were cruel, but they bounced off the man like rain off stone. The stranger's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, not of pride, but of quiet acceptance. He did not care about proving himself to the rich man anymore. He cared only about the violin in his hands and the sound that still lived inside his heart. He whispered once more, almost too softly for the crowd to hear. "I used to play once, long ago." And this time, those words carried a promise. The crowd leaned in even closer, waiting for the bow to touch the strings. Some people held their breath, not knowing why they suddenly felt nervous. The homeless man opened his tired eyes, his fingers positioned with shaky precision. His heart pounded, but he felt alive in a way he had not felt for years. The rich man rolled his eyes and gestured to the crowd. "This is going to be good. Watch closely, everyone. Watch this fraud. Try to play." He laughed. But the stranger did not hear him anymore. His mind was already inside the music he was about to call back to life. He lifted the bow slowly, his hand trembling less with each second. The city noise faded in the background. The laughter grew distant, and even the cruel voice of the rich man seemed far away. In that moment, there was only the violin, the man, and the heavy silence of the crowd waiting to see what would happen next. The sound of the violin case opening had already drawn people closer. At first, it was only a few curious faces who stopped in their tracks, but within minutes the circle around the homeless man grew wider. The city square, once noisy with footsteps, voices, and car horns, slowly turned into a stage. The man sitting on the ground was no longer invisible. All eyes were on him, and all voices hushed into whispers. A group of teenagers laughed and nudged each other, their phones already out to record the scene. They were waiting for the moment he failed so they could post it online. To them, it was entertainment, a street joke, a man with torn clothes and dirty hands claiming he could play music. They expected him to scrape the strings horribly. They expected the crowd to laugh harder. On the other side of the circle, an old woman leaned on her cane. She looked at the homeless stranger with sharp eyes. Something about his calm movements unsettled her. She wasn't laughing. She was remembering something. But the memory was blurry. Parents held their children closer, telling them to watch. Some whispered that this would be funny. Others whispered that it might be sad. The rich man stood proudly at the center of it all. His expensive suit and shiny shoes sparkled under the sunlight. He crossed his arms and smirked at the growing audience. He wanted everyone to see his power, how easily he could make a hungry man dance for amusement. "Come on," he called out loudly. "Play for your supper, old man." His voice rang out like a bell, sharp and cruel. It made some people laugh, but others frowned. Their smiles faded as they watched the stranger's hands shake over the violin. The homeless man did not respond to the cruel voice. He held the violin gently. His fingers ran across the wood, feeling every scratch, every scar on its surface. His eyes softened, and for a moment it looked like he was somewhere else. Not on the dirty street corner, but in a memory. In his silence, the crowd grew restless. Is he going to play or not? Someone muttered. Maybe he doesn't even know how. Another whispered. Then the man lifted the bow. His hand trembled, but it wasn't fear of the people. It was the weight of years of silence. His heart pounded in his chest. He could almost hear the applause of another life, another time. His breathing slowed and he pressed the violin gently to his chin. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the first sound. The teenagers snickered. "He's going to make the worst sound ever," one of them said. But they didn't look away. Nobody did. It was strange. The more the man prepared, the quieter the square became. The laughter softened. The whispers stopped. The tension wrapped around everyone like an invisible rope. A young boy in the crowd asked his mother, "Why is everyone watching?" The mother hushed him, though she herself didn't know why she felt nervous. Perhaps it was the way the man moved with care and dignity, as if this moment mattered more than food, more than survival. The rich man rolled his eyes dramatically. "Any day now," he said loudly, hoping to spark laughter again. But the crowd didn't laugh this time. They were too focused on the man sitting in the middle of them all. His silence was louder than the rich man's insults. The homeless man lowered his eyelids. He remembered a stage with golden lights. He remembered an orchestra tuning around him. He remembered an audience waiting. He remembered his wife smiling in the front row, his daughter clapping with tiny hands. Those memories were ghosts now, but they still lived inside the violin he held. The bow touched the strings, but he didn't draw it across just yet. He paused, his body frozen for a heartbeat. The entire square froze with him. It was as if time itself was waiting. A dog stopped barking, even the traffic noise seemed softer. The man took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, he let the weight of music return to his body. The crowd could feel something coming. They didn't know what, but they could feel it in their bones. The smirks faded. The phones lowered slightly. The rich man clenched his jaw. Annoyed that he was no longer in control of the crowd's attention, he tapped his foot impatiently, but nobody was looking at him anymore. They were all staring at the man with the violin. The stranger's fingers pressed gently against the strings. His hands steadied as though the violin itself gave him strength. The bow hovered, then lowered. The moment stretched out longer than anyone expected. It was unbearable suspense. And yet nobody moved. It was as if the city square, the crowd, even the air itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, with the world waiting, the homeless man finally began to play. The bow finally touched the strings, and a sound came out. At first it was soft, almost shaky, like the voice of someone who had not spoken in years. A few people in the crowd smirked, ready to laugh, but then the second note followed, stronger, clearer, and filled with something unexpected. The music rose slowly, carrying with it an emotion that was raw and heavy. The square grew still, and every laugh died in the air. The man's hands, though rough and tired, seemed to remember what his heart had never forgotten. His fingers moved with care, and the melody began to flow. It was not just music, it was a voice, a story, a confession of a life filled with pain and beauty. The sound cut through the noise of the city, weaving its way past honking horns, street, cellars, and murmurs, until all of it faded away. The square, once loud and restless, was now quiet. Everyone was listening. The children who had giggled before were wide-eyed now, holding on to their parents' hands without speaking. The teenagers who had been recording kept their phones up but forgot to laugh. Their mouths hung open as the music reached them in a way they could not explain. Even the old woman leaning on her cane felt her chest tighten. She closed her eyes and remembered concerts from years ago. Remembered seeing a man on stage with the same fire in his playing. Could it be the same man? She wondered. The rich man, who had expected a joke, froze where he stood. His smirk slipped from his face. His eyes narrowed as if refusing to believe what he was hearing. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. He had wanted the crowd to laugh at the poor man's failure. Instead, the crowd now stared at him with silence, almost forgetting he was there at all. His power over the moment was gone, stolen by the sound of the violin. The music grew stronger. The homeless man closed his eyes as the bow danced across the strings. He poured his soul into every note. The melody carried sadness but also strength. It was the story of a man who had lost everything, yet still carried music in his heart. Each note seemed to speak, "I am still here, I still matter, you cannot take this from me." The sound wrapped around the crowd like a wave, pressing on their hearts. Some people felt tears forming without knowing why. A mother wiped her eyes. Quickly, embarrassed, a young man recording lowered his phone slowly, forgetting about views and likes. He only wanted to listen. A businessman in a hurry stopped checking his watch, forgetting his meeting, forgetting the time. Everyone was trapped in the same spell. The homeless man's face showed no anger, no bitterness. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. His body swayed gently with the rhythm. His fingers moved with certainty. The violin, though old and scratched, sang as if it was alive. It was more than music, it was a soul speaking after years of silence. The melody shifted, rising higher. It soared into the air, reaching the buildings, bouncing off the windows, climbing above the heads of everyone watching. It felt like the city itself had stopped breathing. A street vendor stood frozen with a piece of bread in his hand. A taxi driver leaned out of his car window, forgetting to honk. A police officer on patrol paused his walk, stunned by the beauty of the sound. And then, just as it had climbed high, the music fell into a softer tone. gentle and trembling like a whisper. The notes carried the weight of longing, of someone who had lost much but never lost the ability to dream. The sound filled the ears of the crowd, but more than that, it filled their hearts. Many lowered their heads, ashamed of the way they had laughed before, ashamed that they had doubted him. The rich man's face turned red. He clenched his fists, trying to hold on to his pride, but the music was louder than his ego. He could not stop it. He could not control it. He looked around and saw people staring at the homeless man with admiration, not at him. His plan to humiliate had turned against him. The more the stranger played, the smaller the rich man felt. The homeless man did not notice any of this. To him, the crowd had disappeared, the city had disappeared. He was somewhere else, entirely. Back on a stage under warm lights, back in a time when people clapped with joy, back with his family watching proudly. For a moment, the pain of his present life was gone. For a moment, he was whole again. The crowd leaned closer, afraid to even breathe too loudly. They did not want to break the spell. It was as if they were part of something greater, something rare. Each note carried them deeper into a story without words. They understood it without needing explanation. It was the voice of suffering, of beauty, of hope. And then, after minutes that felt like hours, the melody reached a point where everyone could feel it was building towards something. The stranger's hands pressed harder. The bow moved faster. The violin cried out louder. The sound climbed higher and higher until it filled every corner. Of the square, it was powerful, unbreakable, alive. When he opened his eyes, they shone with tears, and for the first time the crowd saw the truth. This was not just a homeless man. This was a musician, a master, someone who had carried greatness inside him even when the world had turned its back. And in that moment, the entire crowd knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music flowed through the square like water, carrying every listener into another world. The man's rough hands glided across the violin strings with surprising grace. His bow danced as if it had never been away from music. Each note was strong, clear, and full of life. The crowd that had gathered stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. They had come expecting failure, but instead, they were witnessing greatness. People began to whisper softly among themselves, but the whispers were not mocking now. They were filled with awe. "How can he play like that?" one woman murmured. "This is impossible," said another. A man at the back of the crowd lowered his glasses and leaned forward, his eyes wide with recognition. He knew that sound. He had heard it before, not on the street, but in a grand concert. It took him a moment to place it, but then he gasped. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I know who he is." The melody shifted into something deeper, carrying both joy and sorrow. It was like listening to a memory come alive. A mother in the crowd hugged her daughter tightly, while an old man wiped his eyes without shame. They didn't know why the music touched them so much, but it did. The notes were not just sounds, they were stories. Each one carried pain, love, loss, and hope. The man who had recognized him pushed forward through the crowd. His heart raced. He looked at the violinist's face more closely, the wrinkles, the tired eyes, the weathered hands. And then he remembered clearly. This was not just any man. This was once a star, a violinist who had played with great orchestras, a man who had been respected by thousands. The man turned to those beside him and whispered louder this time. "I know him. He used to perform at the city theater. He was famous. His name was spoken with honor." The whispers spread like fire. People leaned closer to each other, repeating the news. "He was a violinist, a great one." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I've heard him before." The more the music flowed, the more certain they became. Some remembered seeing posters long ago with his name on them. Some remembered reading about the tragedy that had taken everything from him. A fire, a family lost, a career destroyed. The homeless man continued to play, unaware that the crowd was beginning to recognize him. His eyes were closed and his soul was inside the music. He was not thinking of fame or glory. He was thinking of his wife's smile, his daughter's laughter, the applause of audiences who had once loved his music. His hands told the story. that words could never explain. The rich man who had mocked him earlier began to sweat. His confident smirk had vanished. He could feel the energy of the crowd changing. No one was laughing anymore. No one was looking at him. All eyes were on the violinist, and worse, people were beginning to whisper his past. If it was true, then the man he had insulted was not just a poor beggar, but someone far greater than himself. The rich man clenched his jaw. His pride stung like a wound. The music reached a softer part, gentle and fragile. The bow moved lightly like a bird gliding through the air. The sound was tender, carrying the weight of loss. People felt their hearts tighten. Some remembered their own pains, their own losses. The violin spoke for all of them, giving their emotions a voice. It was no longer just one man's story. It was everyone's. A young girl in the crowd whispered to her father, "Why is he on the street if he can play like that?" The father had no answer. His throat felt dry. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Life is cruel sometimes." The girl looked at the violinist with tears in her eyes, unable to understand why someone so gifted could be forgotten. The man in the glasses stepped closer, raising his voice now. "It is him, I am sure of it. I saw him years ago in the Grand Hall. He was brilliant, people adored him." His words spread quickly through the square. More and more heads turned. Some people nodded in agreement, remembering. Others gasped as the truth sank in. The homeless stranger was no stranger at all. He was once a celebrated artist, a man who had stood in the spotlight before tragedy had pushed him into the shadows. The music swelled again, louder and fuller, as though the violin itself was answering their whispers. The homeless man opened his eyes for a brief moment. He saw the crowd's faces, no longer mocking, no longer cruel, but softened, moved, transformed. He did not stop. He played even harder, pouring every piece of his heart into the notes. The rich man tried to laugh, but it sounded weak. Nobody listened to him anymore. The crowd had forgotten him. They were too busy realizing the truth. The very man he had called worthless, the man he had mocked, was someone extraordinary. And so, in the middle of the city square surrounded by strangers, the past of the violinist was revealed not through words, not through announcements, but through the sound of his music. Every note told the truth, and the crowd, once hungry for a joke, now stood humbled, their hearts filled with respect. The homeless man did not play to prove himself. He played because he had nothing else left. And yet, in doing so, he reminded everyone of who he truly was. The whispers grew stronger. The truth spread wider, and the crowd, once laughing at him, now stood in awe of a man whose hidden past was shining through each trembling note of his violin. The rich man stood frozen, his face pale as the music rapped. Around the square he had been so sure of himself, so certain that he would humiliate the homeless stranger and make the crowd laugh. But now he felt small. His mocking words echoed in his head like poison, reminding him of his own cruelty. The crowd that once laughed with him no longer paid him attention. They weren't looking at his fine suit or shiny shoes. They weren't impressed by his wealth anymore. All of their eyes were locked on the violinist. The homeless man's music filled the air, and each note seemed to carry judgment, not with anger but with truth. It was as if the violin itself was exposing the arrogance of those who mocked the weak. The rich man shifted uncomfortably, his throat dry, his hands clenched into fists, not out of strength but out of shame. He tried to laugh, tried to regain control, but the sound of his voice cracked. No one cared. No one laughed with him this time. People in the crowd began whispering louder. "That rich man mocked him," one said. "He tried to make him look like a fool," said another. Heads turned toward the rich man, and the weight of their stares made him feel naked. His expensive clothes no longer gave him power. Instead, they made him look small, cruel, and shallow compared to the man with the violin. The homeless man did not stop playing. He was lost in the music. His eyes glistened with tears, but his hands did not falter. He did not look at the rich man. He did not need to. The music itself was enough. The sound was his shield and his sword. His dignity, stolen so many times before, was now restored in the most powerful way. The rich man felt sweat forming on his forehead. He wanted to leave. But his pride held him there. If he walked away, it would be like admitting defeat. But staying felt even worse. The crowd's admiration for the violinist only grew, and their silence cut into him like a blade. He tried to step forward, to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, the music drowned him out. The violin was louder than words, louder than money, louder than his pride. The square was alive with emotion. Some people in the crowd cried openly. Others clutched their chests as though the music had reached into their very hearts. The children who had giggled earlier now watched with wide, serious eyes. The teenagers who had recorded the scene put down their phones, ashamed of their laughter at the start. A man who had once crossed the street to avoid the homeless now wished he could take it back. The violinist had changed them, not with speeches, not with anger, but with the truth of his soul. The rich man, however, could not escape his own reflection. He remembered the way he had kicked the violin case toward the stranger, the way he had laughed and shouted for everyone to hear. He remembered the way he enjoyed the crowd's amusement. Now that same crowd looked at him with disgust. He tried to smile, but it looked fake. He tried to act confident, but his hands shook. A woman near the front said loudly, "Shame on you. You mocked him when he asked only for food." The words spread, carried by the silence. The rich man felt his ears burn. People began murmuring in agreement. Their anger was not loud, but it was powerful. He was no longer the center of attention. He was the villain of the story. Still, the homeless man played on. His music rose higher, filled with fire. The violin sang of suffering, but also of strength. It was a reminder that dignity cannot be destroyed by wealth or cruelty. His tears rolled down his cheeks. But they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release, tears of truth. His bow moved faster, stronger. The crowd gasped as the music grew more powerful than ever. The rich man stepped back, his confidence crumbling. He had thought he was in control, but now he realized he was nothing more than a background figure in this moment. The true light shone on the man he had tried to destroy. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. What excuse could he give? What words could undo the shame? None. For the first time in his life, the rich man felt powerless. His money, his suit, his watch, none of it mattered now. In front of this man's music, he was exposed. The crowd's silence was like a wall closing in on him, and the violin's song was like a mirror showing him the ugliness of his arrogance. He turned his head, wishing he could disappear, but he knew the story of his cruelty would spread just as quickly as the music. The homeless violinist's body swayed with the rhythm. His face glowed with a strange light. His music reached its peak, filling every corner of the square. In that moment, no one saw his torn clothes or his dirty hands. They saw only the greatness inside him. They saw the truth, and the rich man, who had once stood tall and proud, now stood small and broken. His power was gone, his pride shattered. He realized too late that he had tried to crush someone who carried a light far brighter than his own. And the music went on, drowning out his shame, lifting the stranger higher and leaving the rich man in silence. The final note of the song faded into the air like smoke. For a second, the entire square was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the city itself had paused to listen. Then suddenly the silence broke into thunder. People clapped, shouted, and cheered. The sound of applause filled the street so loudly that it echoed off the buildings. The man who had once been invisible was now the center of admiration. Coins and bills began to rain into the violin case. People stepped forward, dropping money not out of pity but out of respect. A woman placed a sandwich wrapped in paper beside him. A young man knelt and handed him a bottle of water. Someone even removed his coat and gently placed it on the man's shoulders. The kindness that filled the square was overwhelming. People who had laughed at him minutes earlier now looked at him with wide eyes, ashamed of their own cruelty. The homeless man lowered his bow. His hands still trembled, but not from weakness. They trembled because he had poured everything inside, his soul into that performance. His tears rolled freely now. He looked around at the faces, strangers who had judged him, mocked him, but were now cheering for him as if he was a hero. For a moment he didn't know whether to smile or cry. He simply nodded, whispering a soft, "Thank you," that was almost lost in the noise. The teenagers, who had been filming, stood frozen. Their phones captured every second, but their expressions had changed. There was no laughter left. They had witnessed something too powerful to joke about. One of them lowered his phone and whispered, "We need to share this. Everyone has to see it." His friends nodded silently, realizing they had just recorded a moment that could move millions. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. She was a reporter who had been passing by on her way to cover another story. Her instincts told her this was bigger. She switched on her microphone and camera crew, capturing the man still sitting on the ground with his violin. She whispered to her cameraman, "Don't stop recording. This is history." The homeless man sat silently as the applause went on. His heart was heavy, but this time it was heavy with relief. He had not played for fame. He had not played for money. He had played because he had nothing else left. But the crowd's response gave him something he thought he had lost forever: dignity. The rich man who had mocked him earlier was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped away quietly, unable to face the shame of the crowd, but whispers about him spread quickly. That was the man who tried to humiliate him. He mocked him, and now look, the world will remember. His absence did not erase his cruelty. The story of his arrogance would be told along with the story of the violinist's triumph. The violinist looked down at his case now filled with money. His stomach growled with hunger, but he was not thinking about food. He was thinking about the feeling he had just experienced, the connection between him and the crowd, the way music had silenced cruelty and awakened compassion. He felt alive again. A young boy stepped forward, tugging at his mother's sleeve. He held out a small drawing he had been sketching while listening. It was a picture of a man with a violin. "This is you," the boy said shyly. The violinist's lips curved into the faintest smile as he accepted the drawing. It was worth more than all the coins in the case. The reporter asked him questions. "Who are you? What is your name? Where did you learn to play?" The man hesitated. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I used to play in halls long ago." The crowd leaned closer, listening. Many of them already knew. Many of them had whispered his past during the performance, but hearing it from his lips made it real. The cameraman zoomed in, capturing his tired face, the scratches on the violin, the tears in his eyes. The image would soon spread far beyond this square, across screens, across hearts. People who were not there would soon feel what the crowd had felt: awe, shame, and inspiration. The applause did not stop, even as he lowered the violin back into the case. People wanted more, but he was too tired. His body ached from hunger. His arms felt heavy. Still, the cheers filled him with warmth he had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel like a beggar. He felt like a musician again. The square was alive with energy. People talked excitedly. Retelling what they had just witnessed, a stranger came forward and asked, "Will you play again tomorrow?" "We will come back. We will bring more people." The man blinked, surprised. He had not thought of tomorrow in a long time, but now he felt hope rising slowly inside him. That night, the video of his performance would begin to spread online. Millions would see it. Millions would share it. But in that moment, standing in the square with the crowd cheering, the homeless violinist didn't think about fame or the internet. He thought about one simple truth. He was not invisible anymore. He was seen, he was heard, and he mattered. The crowd slowly began to leave the square, but the story of what they had seen stayed alive in their hearts. People spoke in hushed voices as they walked away, retelling the moment, retelling the way the man had played as if his soul itself had come alive. Some still wiped tears from their faces. Others clutched their children closer, whispering that they must never judge someone by their clothes or their hunger. The homeless violinist sat quietly, his case full of money and food, but his heart was heavier than ever, not with sorrow, but with something he had thought he would never feel again: hope. That evening, as the city lights glowed and cars rushed past, the man sat under a street lamp. He looked at the small drawing the boy had given him earlier, the picture of a man with a violin. His hands shook as he held it, not because of weakness, but because of the warmth it gave him. A stranger had seen him not as a beggar, not as someone broken, But as who he truly was, a musician, he pressed the drawing to his chest and closed his eyes, letting the feeling sink in. The next morning, the video recorded by the teenagers began to spread across the internet. At first, it was shared among friends with captions like, "You won't believe this," or "The street violinist who shocked us all." Within hours, it grew bigger. Soon thousands of people were watching, then millions. The man who had once been invisible on the street was now seen on screens across the world. His music, captured through shaky phone cameras, touched people far away. People commented with words like, "Beautiful," "I cried watching this," and "This man deserves a stage." Again, news stations picked up the story. They played the video on television. They sent reporters back to the square to find him. The reporter who had been there the first day shared her interview, and more people learned about his past, about the fire that had taken his family, about how grief had broken him, about how he had lost everything and ended up on the streets. The tragedy shocked people, but even more powerful was the truth that his music had survived. His gift had survived. Soon, a concert hall reached out. They offered him a chance to play again, not on the cold stone of a city square, but on a stage filled with light. The invitation was simple but powerful. It read, "The world still needs your music. Please come home." When he read those words, his hands shook. He never thought anyone would say such a thing to him again. For years he had lived only to survive, but now there was something more waiting for him. On the night of the concert, the hall was full. Every seat was taken. People who had seen the video wanted to see him in person. They wanted to hear the music not through a screen but through the air. They wanted to be part of the miracle. The lights dimmed, the curtain rose, and the man walked slowly onto the stage. His clothes were simple, but his back was straighter now. His face still carried the marks of hardship, but his eyes glowed with life. He held the same old violin, the one that had once been laughed at, scratched and worn but still true. The crowd rose to their feet in applause before he had even played a note. Tears filled his eyes as he looked out over the sea of faces. For a moment he almost could not move. Then he lifted the bow, closed his eyes, and began to play. The sound filled the hall, richer than before, stronger than before. Every note carried not just skill, but truth. His music no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to everyone listening. It belonged to every person who had ever been judged, every soul who had ever been broken. It was a reminder that dignity can be lost and found again, that hope can return when least expected. The crowd sat in silence, their hearts moved as deeply as the crowd in the square had been. When he finished, the applause shook the walls. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some shouted his name, some cried. The man bowed his head humbly. He did not smile with pride. He smiled with gratitude. His life, once broken, was beginning again. Back in the city, people still told the story of the day a rich man mocked a stranger and was silenced by music. They told it as a lesson, as a warning, as a reminder that greatness can hide in the most unexpected places. The rich man who had once thought himself untouchable carried the shame of that day like a shadow. He could not escape it for the rest of his life. He would be remembered as the man who mocked greatness and was humbled in front of all. The violinist, however, became more than just a story. He became a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of hidden worth. Schools invited him to speak. Children drew pictures of him. Musicians asked to play with him. But he never forgot that his journey had begun again, not because of fame, but because he had dared to play when he had nothing left. And so the story ended where it began, with a man, a violin, and a crowd. But this time the crowd did not laugh. This time they listened, they cheered, they believed. And the man who once sat hungry on a cold street corner now stood tall, his music alive once more, proving to the world that no soul is ever truly forgotten.